Ryan Caldwell adjusted his diplomatic uniform, tugging at the stiff collar. The interstellar trade station was a sprawl of lights and metal, hanging in the void like a frozen firework. He'd been on missions to these kinds of stations before, but this one had an unmistakably alien feel. The callous, who had invited him here, were not a species given to comfort or aesthetic flourishes. Even the air felt a little too dry, a little too clinical. The arrival platform bustled with activity as Ryan stepped off his shuttle. Alien figures of all shapes and sizes moved through the concourse, some towering and insectoid, others diminutive and sleek, with translucent skin that glowed faintly. His guide was supposed to meet him here, a young callous who had been described in the briefing as exceptionally rational. He wondered how that would translate in practice. "Ambassador Caldwell?" a clipped, efficient voice said behind him. Ryan turned and found himself facing Sienna, the callous diplomat assigned as his liaison. She stood nearly a head shorter than him, her chitinous skin glinting faintly under the station's artificial lights. Her large, multifaceted eyes studied him intently, and her thin, jointed arms were folded in front of her torso. She wore a fitted tunic that Ryan assumed was formal callous attire, though its minimalist design made it hard to tell. "That's me," Ryan said, forcing a smile. "You must be Sienna." "I am," she replied without any hint of warmth or formality. "Your quarters are prepared. I will escort you." As she turned to lead him through the crowded concourse, Ryan fell into step beside her. "It's a bit livelier here than I expected. Not quite the austere trading post I had in mind." "This station is a logistical hub," Sienna explained, her voice even and precise. "The callous do not build facilities larger than necessary. This station, however, is an exception due to its position near several key mineral-rich asteroids. It serves a practical function." Ryan nodded, not missing a beat. "So it's not about grandeur, just efficiency." "Precisely." Sienna glanced at him, and for a moment he thought he caught a flicker of curiosity in her expression. But it passed so quickly that he couldn't be sure. They reached a transport pod that carried them deeper into the station. Ryan tried again to break the ice. "I have to admit, I'm intrigued by your people. You're known for being highly logical, but logic isn't always easy to maintain, especially when emotions are involved." "Emotions do not factor into our decision-making," Sienna said matter-of-factly. "They are considered unnecessary and often detrimental. Instead, we rely on calculated analysis." "I see," Ryan said, studying her. "What about personal connections? Friendships? Do those exist in callous society?" "Relationships among our kind are purely functional. Individuals collaborate based on aptitude and compatibility. Emotional bonds are irrelevant." Ryan leaned back in his seat, nodding slowly. "That's quite different from how humans approach things. For us, emotions are part of everything. Relationships, work, even diplomacy. They can be messy, sure, but they're also what make us human." Sienna tilted her head, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the pod's soft interior lights. "Your reliance on emotion seems inefficient. It introduces variables that complicate rational processes." "Maybe," Ryan admitted, "but sometimes those variables lead to creative solutions that pure logic might overlook." Sienna didn't respond right away. The pod glided to a stop, and the doors opened onto another corridor. She stepped out first, her movements precise. Ryan followed, trying to gauge her mood, though her alien physiology made it nearly impossible. He wondered what kind of diplomatic partnership this would turn out to be, with one side driven by instinct and feeling, and the other by pure reason. As they walked, Ryan decided to try a lighter approach. "So, Sienna, do you ever take a break from all the logic? Kick back. Enjoy a nice cup of, I don't know, whatever callous drink in their downtime." Sienna stopped and turned to him, her expression unreadable. "We do not engage in leisure as you understand it. Our rest periods are designed to optimize cognitive efficiency and physical recovery." Ryan smiled faintly, not sure if she was serious or if this was some deadpan alien humor. "Well, maybe we can swap notes while I'm here. You teach me a thing or two about efficiency, and I'll show you how to relax. Your proposal is unconventional, Sienna said, her tone neutral. But I will consider it. Ryan chuckled. Fair enough. Let's see how this cultural exchange unfolds. They continued on to his quarters, and Ryan felt a strange mix of curiosity and challenge. Sienna was unlike anyone he'd met before, aloof yet intriguing. He couldn't tell if she'd actually warmed to him at all, or if she was simply tolerating his presence. Either way, the days ahead promised to be anything but dull. Chapter 2. Cultural Exchange. Ryan leaned back in the chair at his temporary quarters, taking a sip from a steaming cup of coffee. Across the small table, Sienna watched him with a quizzical tilt of her head. I still don't understand, she said, her mandibles twitching slightly. If the beverage itself does not provide measurable nutritional value, why do you drink it so frequently? Ryan grinned, setting the cup down. It's not just about the caffeine, although that helps. It's the ritual, the warmth. It's like, I don't know, a comfort thing. Comfort, Sienna repeated, as though the word was a foreign concept. You derive satisfaction from consuming something solely because it makes you feel warm? Exactly, Ryan said. And that's just scratching the surface. Take art, for example. It doesn't serve a practical purpose in the way your efficient architecture does, but it enriches life. It speaks to something deeper. Sienna was silent for a moment, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the soft glow of the room's lighting. We create visual designs, but they are intended to convey clear data. What you call art appears to lack such precision. Its purpose is unclear. That's part of what makes it great, Ryan countered. It's open to interpretation. It's a way of expressing things that can't always be put into words. I mean, you ever seen a painting or sculpture that made you stop and think, even if it didn't serve a functional purpose? I have not, Sienna admitted. Ryan leaned forward, his enthusiasm growing. Then maybe it's time you did. I've got a library of Earth's greatest works on my tablet. You can see how humanity tells stories through images, through music. It's not logical, but it's powerful. I would like to observe these creations, Sienna said after a pause. Though I do not fully understand their utility. That's the spirit, Ryan said, unlocking his device. Let's start with something simple, a landscape painting. It's one of our oldest forms of art. As Ryan scrolled through his gallery, he noticed Sienna leaning slightly closer, her gaze fixed on the screen. He opened an image of a serene countryside scene, golden fields stretching toward a hazy horizon under a pale blue sky. The light in the image seemed to shift, giving it a sense of depth that felt almost alive. Sienna's mandibles moved faintly, the closest thing he'd seen to a frown. This image does not convey information in a way I recognize. Yet it is not unpleasant. That's a start, Ryan said with a grin. You don't have to understand it fully. Just look at it and see how it makes you feel. Feel, she repeated as though the concept was alien, which Ryan supposed it was. I will attempt this. Ryan swiped to another image, this one of a bustling city street at sunset. The warm, glowing hues reflected off the buildings and distant figures in the painting seemed to be in motion, caught mid-step as they carried on with their lives. Sienna studied the image, her large eyes unblinking. There is a sense of energy. Movement. Yet it is static. Exactly. It captures a moment, but it hints at so much more. The story, the people, the lives they lead. I see no data about these lives, Sienna said, her voice thoughtful rather than dismissive. Yet I understand that you perceive a narrative. Ryan put the tablet down, pleased that she was beginning to engage. See? You're starting to get it. Now imagine this, if a single image can stir curiosity, think about what music can do. It's another way we connect, through rhythm, melody, emotion. Sienna's antennae twitched slightly. I have read that humans attach great importance to sound-based art forms. I find it curious that something so intangible could have value. Value isn't always about numbers or functions, Ryan said. Sometimes it's about what something brings out in you. Like listening to a song that reminds you of home or of someone you care about. I see, Sienna said quietly, though I am not certain I have experienced such associations. The concept of home for us is more about purpose than place. Maybe you'll start to see it differently after we go through some examples, Ryan said. Let me play you something. He selected a piece of music, something gentle and melodic with a haunting violin and piano duet. The notes filled the small room and Ryan watched as Sienna stilled, her attention entirely on the sound. She didn't say anything, but her stillness spoke volumes. For once, she seemed less focused on analyzing and more on experiencing. When the music ended, Ryan leaned back and gave her a moment to process. What did you think? Sienna's voice was softer than usual. I do not have the correct terms. It was not unpleasant. And it was different. That's a good start, Ryan said. We'll keep exploring. The more you're exposed to these human creations, the more you might discover about yourself too. She regarded him with a gaze that felt less alien now, as if some small barrier had been crossed. I am willing to continue this exchange. Then it's a deal, Ryan said, smiling. Tomorrow we'll try something new. But for now, take a moment to let this all sink in. Sometimes the best way to understand is just to let yourself feel. Chapter 3, The First Bond. The station's main atrium stretched out before Ryan and Sienna, a vast space filled with quiet activity. Streams of callous engineers moved methodically across platforms, checking the station's structural integrity after a recent meteorite impact. The air hummed with the faint buzz of alien machinery and the occasional murmured commands in a language Ryan couldn't begin to decipher. Here's what I don't understand, Ryan said, stepping over a cluster of tangled power conduits. You Callus run this place like clockwork. Everything's so precise. How does a rock from space manage to punch a hole in your perfect station? Sienna glanced at him, her antennae twitching. No system is infallible, Ambassador Caldwell. The meteorite strike occurred at a velocity beyond the tolerance thresholds of our outer shields. We are already implementing corrective measures to ensure the event is not repeated. Ryan smirked. It just goes to show, no matter how well you plan, the universe always has a surprise or two in store. Such unpredictability is why our systems are designed to adapt quickly, Sienna replied, her tone neutral. Now, please follow me. We are expected in the primary junction chamber. As they walked, Ryan studied the hive-like architecture of the Callus station. It lacked the familiar curves and angles of human-built environments, instead relying on an intricate network of hexagonal patterns that seemed to shift and shimmer under the station's pale lighting. The whole place felt alive, constantly changing, adjusting to whatever demands the moment placed upon it. So, Ryan said, trying to keep up with her brisk pace, this junction chamber we're heading to, what exactly do we need to do there? Your task will be to assist with recalibrating the oxygen flow regulators, Sienna said matter-of-factly. Your human physiology is better suited to manipulating the manual controls. I will guide you through the procedure. Wait a minute, Ryan said, raising an eyebrow. You're telling me I've been brought in as a glorified wrench turner? If that is how you wish to phrase it, Sienna said without missing a step, then yes. Ryan chuckled. Well, it's not exactly what I signed up for, but I'll play along. When they arrived at the junction chamber, Ryan was struck by the complexity of the control panel. Dozens of tiny levers, buttons, and glowing indicators covered the wall. He glanced at Sienna, who stood by the panel with her usual calm demeanor. Okay, he said, cracking his knuckles. What's the first step? Sienna's fingers hovered over a row of controls, not quite touching them. First, ensure the pressure gauges are within the acceptable range. The indicators will turn from green to yellow if they exceed the threshold. Ryan squinted at the gauges. Looks good so far. They're all in the green. Good, Sienna said. Now, slowly rotate the fourth lever from the left until the central indicator stabilizes at 1.25. Ryan reached for the lever, hesitated, then glanced at her. Any particular reason it's the fourth lever? I mean, why not the fifth? Because the fourth lever corresponds to the oxygen intake valve, Sienna said. The fifth lever regulates nitrogen levels. Mixing them would cause an imbalance. Got it, Ryan said, carefully turning the lever. The central indicator moved slightly, then settled at 1.25. How's that? Acceptable, Sienna replied. Now, adjust the third knob counterclockwise by 2 full turns. Ryan followed her instructions, then stepped back to let her inspect the readouts. I'll admit, he said, it's kind of satisfying seeing everything come into alignment. I can see why you Callus love precision so much. It is a necessary part of our existence, Sienna said, studying the panel. However, I find your enthusiasm noteworthy. Ryan grinned. Well, maybe you're rubbing off on me. Or maybe I'm just a natural at this. Sienna's antennae twitched in what Ryan was beginning to recognize as mild amusement. You have completed the task. The regulators are now stable. Nice teamwork, Ryan said, stepping back from the console. See? Not so bad working together. She regarded him quietly for a moment before saying, You performed adequately, Ambassador Caldwell. I'll take that as a compliment, he said with a smile. So, what's next on the list? Sienna paused before replying. There is another system that requires recalibration, but it can wait. You have completed enough tasks for today. Ryan leaned against the wall, folding his arms. You sound like you're letting me off the hook early. Consider it an opportunity to experience leisure, Sienna said, though her tone remained even. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Did you just suggest I take a break? I didn't think that was part of the callous vocabulary. It is not, she admitted. But you have demonstrated competence, and I have observed that humans often value periods of rest. You may make use of your remaining time as you see fit. Ryan's grin widened. I'm impressed, Sienna. That almost sounded like a compliment, and a gesture of kindness rolled into one. It was neither, she said flatly. It was merely an observation. Sure, Ryan said with a chuckle. Whatever you say. Chapter 4, Bridging the Gap. The lights flickered overhead as Ryan and Sienna stepped into the dimly lit storage bay. The sharp scent of burnt metal lingered in the air, a reminder of the recent malfunction that had sent half the station's systems into chaos. Despite the callous, meticulous design, their main relay hub had taken a hit, leaving several crucial sectors underpowered. Great, Ryan muttered, eyeing the tangle of cables and shattered conduits. What are we even looking for in here? Sienna glanced at a compact scanner in her hands. The auxiliary power relay should be behind that bulkhead. Once we locate it, I will instruct you on the necessary adjustments. Ryan followed her pointed gaze toward a sealed panel. And by adjustments, you mean I'll be crawling around in there while you supervise? Your physique is more suited to navigating confined spaces, Sienna said without a hint of humor. He chuckled. I knew I'd regret skipping arm day. All right, let's get to it. As Ryan unlatched the panel and slipped inside, his voice echoed faintly from within. You're not going to leave me in here, are you? I will remain nearby, Sienna replied. If you encounter difficulty, inform me at once. I'm counting on you for that, Sienna, he called back, the sound of clinking metal accompanying his words. Ryan worked his way through the narrow tunnel, shifting past sparking cables and debris. His flashlight beam caught the edge of a small console, and he paused. Okay, I think I found something. It's a relay, all right. Looks like some of the connectors are fried, though. Remove the damaged components and set them aside, Sienna instructed from the opening. I have replacements. Ryan fiddled with the connectors, his hands growing slick with a faint residue. You know, this would be a lot easier with a second pair of hands. You are performing adequately, Sienna said evenly. I'll take that as your version of a compliment, Ryan muttered, carefully extracting a charred module. What's next? Insert the replacement module into the same position. Ensure that it clicks into place. Then use the blue cable to reconnect the primary circuit. Blue cable, got it, Ryan said, feeling around for the correct wire. As he attached it, a faint hum resonated through the tunnel. Hey, I think it's powering up. Did I do that right? The readings are stable, Sienna confirmed. Proceed to the next connector. All right, one more. Ryan worked steadily, his brow furrowing in concentration. Despite the tedious task, he felt a strange sense of camaraderie with Sienna. She wasn't exactly warm, but her presence, even her clinical instructions, felt reassuring. He found himself appreciating her calm demeanor in a way he hadn't expected. After securing the final connection, he backed out of the panel and stood up, stretching his arms. Well, that was fun. What's next on the to-do list? Sienna studied the scanner, her expression unchanged. The circuit is fully operational. Power should now be restored to this sector. We will verify the output levels at the main control console. Lead the way, Ryan said, motioning for her to take the lead. I'm starting to get used to being your assistant. You are not my assistant, she said plainly. You are my human liaison. Sure, Ryan said with a grin. Whatever helps you sleep at night. Sienna glanced at him. I do not require sleep in the same manner as humans. It's a figure of speech, Ryan replied, suppressing a laugh. You know, I think you're starting to get my sense of humor. I am merely processing your communication style, she said, her voice neutral. I find it peculiar. They reached the control console where Sienna began scanning the output data. Ryan leaned against the railing, watching her work. So, once we're done here, do I get a gold star or something? Your performance has met expectations, she replied without looking up. High praise coming from you, Ryan said, smiling. Seriously though, we make a pretty good team. You've got the brains and I bring the charm. Toj. Gee, each other, working in sync. She considered his words, her antennae twitching. You propose that our differing approaches have contributed to our success? That's exactly what I'm saying, Ryan said, crossing his arms. You're all logic and I'm a bit of everything. It balances out. Sienna didn't respond immediately. Instead, she returned her attention to the console, her fingers dancing over the controls. Ryan let the silence linger, realizing he didn't need her to confirm it. He could feel it in the way they moved together now, the unspoken rhythm they'd developed. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. And in that quiet moment, he found himself appreciating the partnership in a way he hadn't expected. Chapter 5: The Touch of Humanity. Ryan squatted down next to the large cylindrical crate, his hands resting on his knees. He peered inside, squinting at the jumble of parts Sienna had identified as replacement filtration units. "You're telling me all of these need to be installed today?" he asked, arching a brow. Sienna stood beside him, her posture as composed as ever. "Correct. The station's environmental controls are running at reduced capacity. Prompt replacement is necessary to maintain optimal oxygen levels." Ryan groaned, pushing himself to his feet. "I didn't exactly sign up to be your maintenance guy." "You agreed to assist," Sienna replied. "Your assistance is appreciated." Ryan chuckled softly. "That's the closest thing to a thank you I've gotten from you." She tilted her head, her expression, or at least what passed for one among the callous, unchanging. "Acknowledging your contribution is sufficient." Sure, Ryan said, rolling his shoulders. "Let's get started then. Where's the first one going?" Sienna gestured to a nearby air intake vent. "That unit requires immediate replacement. The process is straightforward: remove the panel, extract the old filter, and insert the new one." "Sounds easy enough," Ryan said, kneeling down to inspect the vent. He pried off the panel and leaned in, grimacing at the grime-covered filter inside. "You know, you Callus are all about efficiency, but these filters look like they haven't been changed in a decade." Sienna crouched beside him, her hands resting lightly on her knees. The filters were replaced within the expected maintenance cycle. However, the recent meteorite impact introduced contaminants that accelerated their degradation. Ryan pulled the old filter out and set it aside, grabbing a new one from the crate. "All right, let's see if this fits." He slid it into place, adjusting it until it clicked. "How's that?" "Acceptable," Sienna said, studying the vent. "The sensor readings indicate an improvement in air quality." Ryan leaned back, his hands resting on his thighs. "One down, how many more to go?" 26, Sienna replied, already standing and moving toward the next vent. Ryan groaned again but followed her, grabbing another replacement filter. "You know, for a species that prides itself on logic and planning, you sure like to throw a lot of work my way. You possess the necessary physical dexterity and stamina for these tasks," Sienna replied matter-of-factly. "Your assistance expedites the process." "Glad to know I'm appreciated," Ryan muttered. As they worked their way through the filters, Ryan began to notice something unusual about Sienna's behavior. Though her tone remained even and her instructions precise, she started to pause occasionally, watching him closely as he maneuvered the panels and inserted the filters. Once, when he struggled to align a filter properly, she reached out and adjusted it herself, her hand briefly brushing his. "Hey, I had it," Ryan said, though he didn't pull back. "I observed an inefficiency," she said. "I corrected it." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Thanks for the vote of confidence." She straightened, looking at him for a moment longer than usual before turning to the next vent. "Proceed," she said, her voice almost softer. As the hours passed, the repetitive work began to feel less tedious. They settled into a rhythm, Ryan handling the physical labor while Sienna provided guidance and updates on the station's environmental readings. Despite her analytical demeanor, Ryan found himself appreciating her presence. She didn't micromanage, and her calm approach made the task less frustrating. Eventually, as they finished the last vent, Ryan leaned against the wall, wiping his forehead. "There. All done. Your station should be breathing easy now." Sienna examined the readouts on her handheld scanner. "Air quality levels have returned to optimal parameters." "I'll take that as a thank you," Ryan said with a grin. "You may interpret it as such," Sienna replied. He laughed, shaking his head. "You're full of surprises, Sienna." She tilted her head slightly. "In what way?" "Well, for one, you actually seem to care whether or not I collapse from exhaustion," Ryan teased. Her antennae twitched faintly. "It is logical to ensure the well-being of a cooperative partner. Your continued functionality benefits the station's operations." Ryan placed his hands on his hips, studying her. "You know, I think that might be your way of saying you're starting to like working with me." "I have no reason to dislike your assistance," she said, turning toward the corridor. "The task is complete. You may now rest." Ryan watched her for a moment, a small smile playing on his lips. "Sure thing, boss." Chapter 6: Kissing and Connection. The faint hum of the station's power grid provided the only sound as Ryan and Sienna stood in one of the observation decks. The room was dimly lit, with only the soft glow from the viewing window casting shadows on the walls. Outside, the vast expanse of space stretched in all directions, stars twinkling like distant beacons. "This is the best view on the station," Ryan said, leaning against the rail. "Quiet, private, and not a maintenance vent in sight." Sienna stood beside him, her posture as composed as ever. She tilted her head slightly, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the starlight. It is visually pleasant. However, I fail to see what makes this view superior to others. The data is the same. Ryan chuckled. It's not about data, Sienna. It's about the feeling you get when you look out there. The scale, the beauty of it all. It's hard to explain. It's something you have to experience. She glanced at him, her antennae twitching faintly. You often speak of experiences as though they hold intrinsic value. I find this perspective unusual. Unusual's not a bad thing, Ryan said, smiling. It's what makes life interesting. Take this moment, for instance. Just standing here, enjoying the quiet, looking at the stars. It's not productive or efficient, but it's still meaningful. Sienna's gaze shifted back to the window. Meaningful. A concept I am still attempting to understand. Ryan didn't press her further. He'd learned over the past few days that Sienna often needed time to process new ideas. Instead, he leaned closer to the window, watching a faint comet streak across the darkness. For a long moment, they simply stood in silence, side by side. Finally, Sienna spoke. You have mentioned that humans express themselves through actions as well as words. I have observed your behavior, your mannerisms. They are often difficult to quantify. That's part of being human, Ryan said. We don't always fit neatly into categories. Sometimes we just feel. Sienna hesitated. And this concept of feeling, does it include the physical actions humans often perform when expressing closeness? Ryan turned to her, intrigued. What kind of actions do you mean? Her antennae twitched again, and she seemed to be searching for the right words. I have noticed that humans often touch. Your gestures, placing a hand on someone's shoulder, or clasping hands, seem to convey something beyond verbal communication. That's right, Ryan said, nodding. Touch is one of the ways we show connection. It's not just about words. It's about how you make someone feel by being close to them. Sienna looked at him, her large eyes unwavering. What about kissing? The question caught Ryan off guard. He raised an eyebrow, unsure if she was serious. Kissing? Where'd you hear about that? Human cultural records, Sienna said, her tone matter-of-fact. It appears to be a common gesture of affection, yet I cannot determine its purpose. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. Well, a kiss can mean a lot of things. Can show love, comfort, even trust. It's one of those things you can't fully understand just by reading about it. You have to experience it. She seemed to consider this, her gaze never leaving his. Then, would you demonstrate? Ryan blinked. Are you sure about that? I am curious, Sienna said. I wish to understand. Ryan hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. All right, just keep in mind it might feel a little strange at first. Sienna remained still, watching him intently. Ryan leaned in slowly, giving her plenty of time to change her mind. When their lips finally met, it was soft and brief, gentle enough to be barely more than a touch. Sienna didn't pull away, but her antennae quivered faintly. As they parted, her hand reached up almost instinctively to touch her own lips. It is unlike any other sensation I have encountered. Ryan smiled softly. It's not something you can put into words, is it? No, she said, her voice quieter than usual. I cannot describe it. But I do not find it unpleasant. That's a start, Ryan said, stepping back to give her space. You don't have to analyze everything, Sienna. Sometimes it's okay to just feel. She nodded slowly, her antennae still. For once, her normally analytical demeanor seemed to soften. Thank you, Ryan. I will think on this. Take all the time you need, he said, turning back to the window. The stars outside continued to shine as though nothing had changed. But Ryan knew something had. In that brief moment, they had crossed a line, no, not a line, but a bridge. One built not of logic, but of understanding. Chapter 7, Emotional Awakening. The air in the station's main observation lounge carried a faint hum from the nearby generator, a low vibration that Ryan had grown used to over the past weeks. He stood near one of the tall, narrow windows, arms crossed over his chest, watching the slow rotation of a distant moon. The lounge was empty except for Sienna, who stood a few steps away, still and quiet, her gaze fixed on the stars. Ryan broke the silence first. So, you've been awfully quiet since last night. Sienna's antennae twitched slightly and she turned toward him. I have been processing. That kiss really threw you for a loop, huh? Ryan asked, a small grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. I am not certain what a loop is in this context, Sienna said, tilting her head, but the experience was unexpected. It introduced variables I had not previously considered. Ryan chuckled. Welcome to the human experience. It's not all formulas and predictable outcomes. Sometimes things just happen and you have to figure out how you feel about them. Sienna stepped closer, her movements deliberate. I have reviewed human cultural data and noted that emotional expression is considered integral to many aspects of your society. Yet I find it unsettling. Logic dictates clarity and purpose. Emotion introduces confusion. That's true, Ryan said. Feelings can be messy. They can make you second-guess things or lead you down paths you didn't plan for. But they can also give you a sense of connection you'll never find in logic alone. She seemed to consider this, her gaze shifting to the floor. Since meeting you, I have observed changes in my thought patterns. I have made decisions not entirely based on calculated outcomes. She hesitated. I have experienced sensations that cannot be categorized as purely logical. Ryan leaned against the window frame, watching her closely. And how do you feel about that? I am unsure, she admitted. At times it is disconcerting. I question whether these sensations interfere with my purpose. At other times, she paused, her antennae lowering slightly. At other times, I find it intriguing. That's a good start, Ryan said, his voice soft. You're not going to figure it all out overnight. It's a process. And you don't have to go through it alone. Sienna looked up at him, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the distant stars. You would assist me? Of course, Ryan said with a smile. We're a team, remember? Besides, I think you're already making progress. The fact that you're even asking these questions means you're starting to understand what it means to feel. Her posture shifted slightly as though some unseen weight had been lifted. Your perspective is unusual, but not without merit. I will continue to explore this. Ryan nodded, then gestured toward the seating area. How about we take a break and just talk? No analysis, no station protocols, just conversation. She followed him to one of the small, curved benches by the window. Ryan sat down, and after a brief pause, Sienna joined him, her movements precise as always. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Ryan spoke. So, tell me about what it's like growing up as a callus. I mean, you mentioned once that relationships are purely functional. But surely you must have had some kind of mentor or friend, someone you looked up to. Sienna considered his question carefully. Our development is guided by designated caretakers. They ensure we acquire the necessary knowledge and skills. There is no emotional attachment involved. The process is efficient. Efficient, Ryan repeated. But isn't there anyone you remember more fondly than the others? Maybe someone who encouraged you, helped you succeed? She tilted her head. There was an elder who provided additional instruction. I recall their guidance as particularly effective. I do not know if I would describe it as fondness, but I appreciated the clarity they provided. Ryan nodded. Sounds like they left a positive impression even if you don't call it fondness. Maybe that's where it starts, recognizing the value someone brought into your life. Over time, that value can grow into something deeper. Sienna's antennae twitched faintly. If that is so, perhaps these new sensations I experience when interacting with you are the beginning of such a connection. Maybe they are, Ryan said with a gentle smile. And that's okay. You don't have to rush it or fully understand it right now. Just let it happen. That's how humans learn to deal with emotion, by experiencing it and growing from it. She was silent for a moment, then gave the smallest nod. I will try. That's all I ask, Ryan said. We'll figure it out together. Chapter 8, New Horizons. The station's central plaza was bustling with activity, filled with the rhythmic steps of callous workers and the occasional human visitor. Ryan stood with Sienna near the departure terminal, his packed bag resting on the floor beside him. Their time on the station had come to an end and he was scheduled to board the shuttle back to the diplomatic corps. Yet, for the first time since arriving, he found himself reluctant to leave. So, Ryan said, leaning casually against a support beam, I guess this is it. Sienna tilted her head, her multifaceted eyes fixed on him. You are departing. That is accurate. That's one way to put it, he said with a faint smile. I mean, it's not like I'll never come back. But you know, it'll be different. Sienna nodded slowly. Our interactions have shifted. Your departure will alter the parameters of our exchanges. Ryan chuckled. You can say that again. I do not see the purpose in repeating, Sienna began, but stopped when she noticed Ryan grinning. You are employing humor. Guilty as charged, Ryan said. I'll miss your deadpan responses. Sienna was silent for a moment, her antennae twitching faintly. I will miss your unpredictability. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Did you just admit you'll miss me? I stated that your behavior introduced variables that I found engaging, she said carefully. If you choose to interpret that as missing you, I will not object. Ryan smiled and shook his head. That's about as close to a sentimental goodbye as I'm going to get from you, huh? It is the most accurate articulation of my perspective, she replied. However, I will note that your presence facilitated certain experiences I would not have encountered otherwise. For that I am grateful. Grateful, huh? Ryan said. I'll take it. He reached down and hefted his bag onto his shoulder. You know, Sienna, you've changed a lot since we first met. I mean, back then, I don't think you would have given me the time of day, let alone thanked me. I have observed changes within myself, she admitted. Interacting with you has expanded my understanding of emotion, connection, and humanity. Well, I'm glad I could help, Ryan said, his voice softening. You've taught me a lot too. About seeing things differently, about thinking before acting. I think we've learned from each other. Sienna's antennae stilled as she regarded him. You describe a mutual exchange. I find the concept satisfactory. Ryan laughed lightly. You're going to make me blush with all these compliments. A chime sounded overhead, signaling that boarding would begin soon. Ryan exhaled, looking back at Sienna. So, what's next for you? Going back to your usual duties? Not immediately, Sienna said. I intend to continue exploring these newfound perspectives. Your departure does not end my curiosity. I'm glad to hear that, Ryan said. And who knows? Maybe I'll see you out there again. It is possible, she said. The universe is vast, but it is not infinite. Ryan extended a hand, and after a brief hesitation, Sienna reached out and placed her hand in his. The touch was light, almost uncertain, but it lingered a moment longer than either of them expected. Take care of yourself, Sienna, Ryan said, his voice warm. And keep learning. Don't be afraid to feel. I will remember your words, she said. Farewell, Ryan Caldwell. With that, Ryan turned and headed toward the shuttle, leaving Sienna standing in the plaza. As the crowd moved around her, she remained still, watching until the airlock doors closed behind him. The hum of the station filled the silence, and the stars outside the viewing window continued their slow, endless dance. For the first time in her life, Sienna felt something she couldn't quantify, a quiet, subtle ache that wasn't unpleasant but wasn't entirely comfortable either. It was a sense of absence, a faint pull that reminded her of the human she'd come to know. And in that moment, she understood that her journey was only beginning.